So our objectives today, our aim is to make sure that you leave today's training with an understanding of the range of tools and tactics available to you to move your social media engagement goals forward. Darshana, can you go back to the last one? Thank you. Recognize which tools are right for your team and get thinking on which tips and next steps you may want to try. Darshana gave us a preview of the agenda. That's our big picture for today. So since we've already covered a lot of this housekeeping, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Geely, who's going to help us understand the big picture before we get into some examples of tools and tactics. It's all yours, Julie.
Hi, everyone. All right. So throughout our training series, we've talked a lot about the importance of planning. So we're going to take a few moments to recap some of the items that we've already talked about, just to jog all of our memories and get us leap started into where we're going. We've covered the importance of understanding your audience, who they are, what are they ready for, where are they at. So today we're going to look at some tools and tactics that'll go just a bit deeper. We've also covered the importance of establishing goals and objectives. So what do you want to achieve? Questions like, what will be accomplished? It's not just as a communications team, but as a mission-driven organization from that lens. So many nonprofits establish these high-level goals in other ways. So a few examples could be use power mapping, which is very common with policy organizations, theory of change. A lot of mission-driven nonprofits use that. I know that strategic planning with the 5-year plans is very common as well. Every organization is different. So, and if you're like most organizations, you may be on a marketing team or you might even work alone. So no matter how many people you have on your staff, your marketing and social media plan should not exist in a vacuum. So planning. Why plan? Planning is your map. Planning should be iterative, it should be regular, and it should be ongoing. Adapting, you need to adapt it as you go along, but today we're diving deeper into the tools and tactics that support smarter planning to guide our actions and how we move forward. So when you're thinking about crafting your strategies, you want to ask yourself a few very basic questions that seem basic, but they're pretty hard sometimes. What is my approach? What is my team's process? What are our policies? Is there anything that may need to be reviewed or approved by legal? Always want to keep that in mind. It's a technology, the tools, the tactics. What are the best tools that will get you there? What outcomes do you need? What will be measured? How will you know it's working? And remember, the strategies you want to cultivate are going to be contingent on the tools that you have available to you and your team, as well as the time that they have to dedicate to bringing that forth. Another way that we can think about time and tools is by using an engagement pyramid. I can speak, I promise. The engagement pyramid is a planning tool that enables you to visually map how you can engage at different levels of depth in your campaign and to reach your goal, and recognize that more people are likely to engage with a level of commitment that is lower. So the lower the lift, the more likely people will want to opt in or do what you're asking them to do. So you can use the pyramid to work through how you might level up people and ensure that you're adequately catering to the people who are willing to commit in different ways. You want to make sure try not to get too caught up in the specific categories. You can use specific categories. You can use helpful prompts, but you want to ask yourself what a low, medium, or high level commitment for you, but also might be very different, campaign for someone else, and it might be a very different campaign for different on goals and what you're trying to achieve. So that's a lot of words. So let's see what we mean by all of this. So let's imagine each SMART goal, right, as its own campaign. So let's start with an example. At our last training, we introduced you to the fictional nonprofit based in Southern California called Give It All You Got. These were their organization's annual goals. So you might want the comms team, they'll start mapping out each of these, how each social media can support each one of these goals. So in this example, we marked out 3 key goals for the organization. Organizational goal number 1, increase volunteer recruitment to 100 volunteers. Goal number 2, existing donors increase by 10%. And 3, increase the donor pipeline by 25%. But we're going to start with number 1. The goal is going to be increase volunteer recruitment to 100 volunteers. Now, we want to keep in mind that that will look very different if your organization is starting with 25 volunteers as opposed to 90 volunteers, because it could be, getting to an additional, 10 volunteers looks like a very different thing than it does looking like going from 25 to 100. So now let's begin to craft our strategy. We'll begin with our first question. How do I achieve this goal? In our last training, we also covered personas, or fictional characters that we will use and serve as like sketches of our very real communities. So for this SMART goal, and just as I remember, as I use this phrase, not everybody remembers what each one of this acronym means. So it's SMART, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goal. We're going to use the engagement pyramid to map out how we as a communications team can support the organization's efforts to increase volunteer recruitment to 100 volunteers by next year. So we introduced you to Frank. Frank was a persona that we created from the data and the themes that came out of a focus group of Give All You Got's, their star volunteers. They found that the commonalities of their most dedicated volunteers, or they tended to be from competitive colleges in the area. They wore many hats. They cared about their academics, and they cared deeply about the world. So as a comms, communications and social media team, how do we engage more Franks? Using our engagement pyramid, we want to think about creating content that is going to inspire Frank. We've also already seen how busy he is. So we know we're going to need to repeat ourselves as we're competing for his attention on platforms like TikTok, X, or as I still will call it, Twitter, and Instagram. So we're going to look at his engagement level, so we're at level 1, observing. His mindset is interested in the cause and aware of the organization. Awareness is the major factor. Nature of engagement, he's sporadic in direct communications. Frank might take occasionally distracted glances at the organization's work. These indirect communications may be via word of mouth, social media, traditional media. He may visit the organization's website, but he does not provide contact information. So any direct communication is at their most initiative. Communications will focus on information sharing and awareness building. So we're going to go through each level. Now, just a note, please don't hesitate to drop your questions and insights into the chat. We'll make space to answer them at the end of this section. So then after a while, Frank begins to engage with our content enough to move through to level 2. So our level 2 is following. Perhaps he responds to us in a simple call to action to stay in touch, follow, subscribe, because he's seen the value of our work and has now decided to opt in. Now that he is following, how do we offer value? Nature, so we're going to look at the nature of engagement. You're going to look at regular direct communications. This person's going to receive an ongoing stream of communication focused on information and to pique his interest, if you will. These updates will keep the organization's work top of mind and build his enthusiasm. Now, I caution you to remember that Frank, like all of us, are constantly being bombarded with communications from all sorts of sources. There are lots of things that are competing for Frank's attention, whether it be work, school, social media, friends. So we want to make sure that the content that we do create and the communications we do send out, that they focus on breaking through the noise, because we want to make sure that it grabs his attention, because there's a lot of different things competing for that said attention, so that we can move him to level 3, endorsing. Give It All You've Got now needs to earn enough of Frank's trust to ensure that his endorsement of the mission. Frank is following our work, but he still sees it as your work. So what we need to do is we need to get him to endorse Give It All You Got with low lift, straightforward, single step instruction. That's going to be whether they sign a petition, make a small one-time donation, share our content to amplify our message and get us in front of his community. This aim is to continue deepening Frank's engagement. At level 4, we start to see a significant commitment through time, money, and social capital. Frank has shown us that he is committed to our work and is willing to do some light lift work, but is not really owned or taken responsibility for himself yet. So we want to keep engaging him by still making low risk investments. So ask him to sign more petitions, read and share our newsletters, sign up for volunteer orientation. We want to start to see Frank take on multi-step assignments. So eventually moving through him owning the work through deep volunteer involvement. Now, Give It All You Got's job at this level is to instill and develop a sense of responsibility for the mission to Frank. And the flow of the community becomes a two-way street. So now we've got to start asking Frank to take on larger investments of his time, his money, his social capital, because the organization and its mission is a source of passion. This can take on many forms. Examples could look like creating and publishing organic content about the organization, public speaking at events in his local community, deeper volunteer involvement. We want him to do those things until we get him to level 6, leading. Here, the engaged becomes the engager. Frank is now focused on their energy on engaging and leading others in the work. Frank has now agreed to lead the FSU Campus Activities Board to help the org achieve its mission. Essentially, he's agreed to become the face of the org in his local community and is often mistaken as staff. So he is organizing, he is recruiting, but most importantly, he is leading. At this stage, the metrics become less quantitative and more subjective, which will require us assessing Frank's perceptions. And so we're going to utilize things like surveys and interviews, focus groups, different ways of kind of just making sure that we stay aligned with what the organization and with what Frank is his perceptions are. While we talk about this mapping tool through a pyramid model, we want to take a moment to point out that there's no hierarchy when it comes to those levels. They're all important to cultivate, and it might be useful to think about the pyramid as a funnel, with the widest part of the funnel being the part where you're casting the widest net, and that you get towards the point of the cone, you'll have the greatest one-on-one impact. And you might even have multiple funnels. An engagement period for each of your organization's campaigns or goals. When this is the case, you'll see your campaigns that overlap at certain levels. So don't be alarmed. You want to always see the overlap of the greatest impact and your goal and your goal number 2 into your broadest audience. So now that we've talked about that, let's take a quick pause for reflection. You may have seen us drop these questions in the chat already, and we invite you to share any questions and thoughts you may have about this model. How might the engagement period help you in your social media work? What do people need from your organization to stay engaged at each level? So I'm going to take a few moments, and I'm going to let us get everybody a few moments to start answering those questions in the chat. All right, so I'm going to take a quick second here for us to reflect and pause. So hold on 1 second. Has everybody started responding? All right, so I think I'm going to hand it back over to you, Adriana.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I'm gonna actually pass it over to Dr. Barber. If you are still answering those reflection questions, Please keep doing that in the chat. We've made room in a lot of the presentation today for answering some of those questions you might have as you're processing all this information. So we'll pass it over to Dr. Barber.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh, it's okay. Sorry. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, you
We're
sound
dealing
good.
with okay, we're dealing with a few technical difficulties. So thanks y'all for hanging with me. And my background is my kiddos' room. So apologies, but I'm calling in because I didn't want to miss this training. So thank you. And let's dive in. All right. Tools and tactics. And thank you, Julie, for a great first start. So I'm excited today to talk to you about 3 distinct tools that can help you create and create processes and engage with your audiences at various levels of the pyramid that Julie just talked about. And at the end of all of this, we are also going to have some quick tips to try, even if your posts are still not getting engagement, we want to make sure we give you some actionable tips that you can take home. So let's get started. First on our list is the content calendar. And in previous trainings, you might have heard us talk about this, but a content calendar is used to effectively and consistently manage your content. When you're trying to reach a broad audience, if you remember at your pyramid levels 1, 2, and 3, the observing, following, and endorsing groups from our funnel, posting consistently is super important, and a content calendar can help you do this. Depending on the size of your team and your capacity, posting consistently may mean several times a day, once a day, or maybe just a couple times a week. But it's important to know that if you're not posting at least twice a week, you're probably going to limit some of your engagement opportunities. So go ahead and drop in the chat. I see some of you still chatting about whether or not your organization is currently using a content calendar. And to level set, when we're talking about a calendar, we mean a tracking system for each piece of content that you might post. And this reflects your day-to-day and includes current and planned content for any given day or week. It also might include details of what you're actually going to publish. So the actual asset that you're going to publish, maybe the in-asset and post copy that accompanies it. And then, of course, whether or not it's a video or any hashtags you might want to use. And your content calendar should also specify how you want to repurpose content across various channels. So maybe one asset is going to go up on Instagram and Twitter, and you need to have different copy to accommodate it. So what's the difference, though, between a content calendar and an editorial calendar? An editorial calendar is a bigger picture. It's a overarching framework that defines your content strategy or your overall editorial strategy. So think of it more as your long-term plan. It might tell you the strategy for the coming months, quarters, or years. And your editorial calendar might also highlight key fundraising quarters or which messaging is most important in different types of the year. So for example, in our sample org that we have made called Give It All You Got, right now their editorial calendar is focused on virus season in September, October, November, and December. And their content calendar, meanwhile, helps their team execute the day-to-day. So what actual posts they're going to talk about RSV, flu, and the COVID-19 vaccines. So in this slide, you see 2 examples of a content calendar. And I see a bunch of you posting about what content calendars you're using, which is great. So some of you are probably familiar with this. On the top is a calendar view. And on the bottom shows a view in Monday.com, which is a tool like many of the ones that you all are talking about in the chat. And it shows what we're posting, who's responsible for posting, and of course, who's writing the copy, the publish date and the copy deadline, and the asset and copy status. And there's lots of tools that you can use to do this, but the key elements stay the same. So what are the benefits of a content calendar? And some of you are talking about in the chat, and it'd be great to know what benefits you found based on your experience. And the tips here are that it can save you time and it keeps your activities organized. We'll go to the next slide in a second. Thank you, Darshana. It helps you maintain consistency and establish a regular routine, right? So that you're not scrambling to figure out what you're going to post on a single day. It also increases transparency and collaboration. And this is really important because then you, when you have more than one person on a team, it helps align different team members and make sure everyone's on the same page, even if they're working across departments. It can maintain a consistent message and voice for your organization's brand. And finally, it allows you to respond to timely events or news. And this is something that I love about content calendars, is that just because you have things scheduled doesn't mean that you can't always do an additional post or add something if you're able to jump on a social media trend. And in fact, having something already to go and knowing that you have a handful of posts already scheduled actually frees up your time to be able to join those conversations and capture those timely moments. Now we're going to jump to some of these best practices and tips. And you know, we talked about last time in our PGN training about your social media policies, and just make sure that your content calendar aligns with that. Make sure that your team is on the same page about what your content should look like visually. And of course, about your brand voice, right? Like making sure that everything kind of aligns and it's on brand for you. And it's okay to start simple. Bunch of you have been talking about Airtable, Monday.com, Trello. The sky's the limit. You can even use spreadsheets. And it doesn't really matter which tool you're using, as long as it works for you. But one of our tips is to use naming conventions consistently and to have folders set up to store all of your social media assets so you can really see your system clearly, and also reuse things, right? It can be helpful to have some sort of organization for your asset management, so that maybe next fall, if an asset really did well, you know that you can go to that October folder and grab that asset and either remake it or reuse it again. It also is important to establish a manageable cadence, and don't try to post 7 days a week if you just can't manage it. Finally, we want to make sure that you're tracking your progress. So use your content calendar to track the status of both each piece of content. And you can also use it to track engagement and other relevant metrics and note what's working and what isn't, right? What's flopped and what do you want to change for next time? It's also important to have one person who is kind of your air traffic controller for all of the content that you might be producing. Other people can help, of course, but one person should be responsible for ensuring that all of the content that you make gets out the door on time. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, it's really easy once you have a content calendar to revisit and adapt. Archive your previous calendars for future reference. And like I said, this helps you remember, did something work really great last Thanksgiving? Do it again with a new twist. And of course, we all like to post about key dates or holidays or special events happening. And it can be really helpful to know all of the key dates that you used last year so that you don't have to start everything over. When a new year starts, you can at least start with those base key dates and then add things from there. All right, so I'm gonna pause here for a second, and y'all have been talking about things pretty consistently already, but some of our questions that we want to know, of course, some of you have already been talking about using them, but what are your tips for other organizations? And also, have you found any pitfalls, right? Anything that you'd warn against? I'll pause for a second as y'all consider that. Okay. Hopefully now my background's a little less distracting. Thanks, everybody. Okay, and we'll also jump to our next section. And I'd still love to hear your thoughts on content calendars, but we're going to jump to what is an influencer and dive a little bit, just a small slice, into influencer marketing. So you've probably heard about influencer marketing, but maybe your organization hasn't done it yet, or maybe you've tried it but want to learn a little bit more. And influencer partnerships can allow organizations to connect with your target audience by using popular, relevant public figures And this value can be compared to what we might have done in previous decades, where organizations actually, required publicity coverage or maybe high-priced celebrity endorsements. And instead, today we can use influencers to get some of the same results. And if you align the trusted influencers of your target audience with the values that match your mission as an organization, you're able to tap into the networking communities of that influencer. And of course, our goal here is to drive increased reach on your platforms and of course, conversions or whatever your goal is at that time. So let's start with what an influencer actually is. And an influencer is a prominent figure online, so usually social media, but this could also be a blog, with a dedicated and highly engaged audience. And really, it's not so much how many followers a person has, although that's a factor, but it's really having that engaged audience that makes a big difference when it comes to working with the right influencers. So this could mean that someone has anywhere between 100,000 to 1 million followers. And those million follower people, those are top tier influencers. But it also, and this is really important, it also is just fine to work with micro influencers who maybe have 10,000 followers or less. And regardless of how many followers an influencer has, their followers trust them and they trust their recommendations because they're interested or engaged with their daily activities or the products they buy, or especially for our purposes, the causes they support. So why should you work with them? Well, just like we mentioned, they can add additional reach to your priority populations. And these trusted individuals can also hold more credibility within their community than an ad would. So they also can help you add legitimacy to your own organization. So one big difference between influencers and celebrity endorsements, which I think is really important to clear up, is that influencers are the ones to create and share original content that resonates well with your brand and their audience. So in order for them to do this, you have to find the right influencers and give them the right instructions. And that's what we're going to focus on now. So because influencers are an extension of your brand, it's important to work with influencers who fit both your organization, sorry about that, and your campaign. Let's start first with your existing network. So be sure to vet influencers. Be sure to vet influencers for alignment with your organization's brand. And of course, you want to also make sure that that influencer's values align with yours. And you can look at this by looking at their feeds and their recent activities. You can ask yourself what kinds of content they've been posting and also what the quality is. And of course, do they have a credible following? You might want to make sure that they feel authentic, right? That they are their true selves and they're representing themselves. And you definitely want to make sure that you stay away from people who maybe post controversial content if that doesn't match your organization's goals. Usually you don't want to post or align yourself with someone who uses drugs or alcohol excessively. And of course, any posts that might seem suggestive, either racially or sexually charged content, that's not something that usually works well from an influencer's standpoint. Next up, if you have a match, then you have to be sure that you provide clear instructions. So first off, you want to make sure that you are asking them to do something very specific. So where do you want them to post? What platforms? You want to make sure that what you're doing aligns with the type of content they normally post. So does this fit with your content strategy and their content strategy? And you want to make sure that you are asking for their feedback if you have a campaign, because they might be able to help you improve the campaign that you're currently working on. And you often also, what you'll do is create a sample prompt with key information. And this will show them how their post will connect with the campaign. The last thing is that you want to make sure that you clearly state what the key messages that the influencer has to hit actually are. And that's because some of the posts that the influencer does, whether it's a video or something in feed, will be unscripted, and other parts of it will actually be hitting the key messages that you want them to have in there, no matter what influencer you're working with. And you should also make sure to tell them if you want them to tag your organization or mention it, and make sure that if they are supposed to be using a hashtag, that they're doing that as well. So this is a ton of text. You don't have to worry about all this text on the screen, but it's mostly what we wanted to show you was an example of an influencer prompt. And this is something that we at the Public Good Projects, who is the head organization of PGN, we sent for a campaign about mental health and stigma. And so the key elements here that we wanted to show y'all is that we are actually asking this influencer to post in their own voice. And that's what makes influencers so helpful and so convincing, right? Is because they're representing themselves. But we still want them to still include key messages and facts. So in this example, what we included was a personal story. So we had them start off with something about their own mental health journey. And then the second and third sections there are, they are choosing between one mental health fact and one fact about stigma. And this, for our purposes, of course, is related to health messaging, but it could be whatever is, happening in your own campaign or your own goals, but you want them to make sure that they have kind of this personalized intro and then the key things that they're hitting. You also want a clear call to action. And then you, of course, are going to want them to identify that and disclose that this post is paid or sponsored. And so that's all going to be in the instructions that we have as an example here. Next, we can show you basically how important it is to review the content. So unlike maybe, so a follower just posts about your organization, and even if they're a volunteer and they post a lot and they really enjoy and represent your organization, you're probably not reviewing their content, right? But if you're paying an influencer, you're going to want to make sure that you're reviewing their content and approving the post before they go live. So in order to do this, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to how the posts are phrased, and especially whether they got those must include facts. For us, it was those facts on mental health and stigma. You want to make sure that they're getting them right. You want to make sure that the overall post aligns with the goals of your organization and your campaign, and that it includes all the key components from that instruction document that you sent them. I'll show you what this looks like in practice on the next slide, because on the left here, what you have is something that an influencer sent back to us. And you'll see it says their name and the proposed copy. And you'll see all the edits that we made, right? And it's okay. It's okay to make edits. Influencers are used to this. And they are expecting you to change what needs to be changed. And this can include small changes to language, edits to make sure things are correct. And the main thing is to always try to keep that influencer's voice and make sure it still sounds like them, but to make sure that because you're paying for this, that it's representing you in the best way possible. On the right side here, we have an example of what the final post might look like. And of course, at the end, when their post goes live, it's a good idea to repost the influencer's post on your own feeds. And this helps increase reach and also just gives you an opportunity to have more faces in your feed, right? Because you have this kind of influencer as a brand ambassador speaking directly to their audience and now your audience. And it's just really great to sometimes have these very authentic faces in our feeds. All right, we're now going to move on to our final tool. And of course, if y'all have questions about influencers, we can address those at the end. But we want to talk a little bit about prototyping. We all know that launching a new campaign can mean significant time and money. And so we use prototyping at an early stage so that we can test ideas and reduce risk while still improving things before we commit a lot of our team's time and budget. So prototyping allows us to test early versions of campaign ideas, and the goal is to do this with your target audiences. Effective prototyping generates feedback that helps you make decisions and, of course, improve your concepts based on that feedback. And it's also about just getting ideas out of your head and onto paper or some sort of example. So if you've tested and received feedback from the people you're designing throughout your planning using prototyping, then your strategy and tactics are just more likely to succeed. So once again, prototyping allows us to test early versions of our ideas and generate feedback. And sometimes this can look like a various, it can look really different, right? We have lots of different examples of what prototyping actually is in practice. So this might look like A/B testing 2 different ideas on social media. And I think Ashley has a link that she's, dropping right there. Thank you, Ashley. So this link that she's dropping has a whole slew of concrete, actionable things that are examples of prototyping, depending on what the goals of the content or the campaign that you're working on. But it could be A/B testing different ideas on social media. It also could include making storyboards that help you think through and visualize your idea. Or it also might include role playing and mapping. And remember, if you were in the last training, we talked a lot about personas. And so you could map those personas onto an engagement pyramid. And even if you can't actually test your ideas with a particular audience, you can still run through how a persona might respond to different ideas, just to have an example of whether or not your campaign or your idea might resonate with particular personas. So those are all things to check out. This is an example of a worksheet you can use to audit your content. And this is showing how prototyping helps us iterate on our content creation. So in this example, you pick the message that you want to test up top, and then identify how you'd like to collect feedback, and then it allows for spaces to debrief and summarize so that you can kind of iterate and try something again. And in all of these instances, you're trying to think through what's important to keep, what will you increase, what might you delete, right? And all of the process of integrating feedback and adapting is best done as often as possible. And that includes, even if you've already started a campaign, you should always be seeking to learn and integrate any new information and adapt what you're already doing to each day, month, or year's understanding of reality. So we've gone through a ton of information and we have a few minutes left for questions. But before we get there, we wanted to address a key issue, and that is that many of you have told us, we've tried content calendars, we've tried all these things, and I'm still struggling to get engagement. So we're going to end with some rapid fire tips that help whenever you come across a problem of just posting things and then not having much reaction. So if your social media posts are still not seeing engagement after all of these best practices, here are some things to try. First off, try new hashtags. And that's because hashtags are always evolving. And in using hashtags, we want to make sure number one, that we're not using too few, we're not using too many, and that we're not using banned ones. This is really interesting, so hang with me for a second. But banned hashtags are hashtags that Instagram users have reported to the platform because posts that use them go against Instagram's guidelines. So this means that once a hashtag is banned, any post that uses that hashtag will be hidden, and that hurts your organic reach. Banned hashtags are always changing, and this is based on community reports and Instagram's investigations. And unfortunately, Instagram doesn't publish like a definitive list of the currently banned hashtags, which would be nice. But there are articles that track them, which is what Ashley just dropped in the chat. And some of them are really obvious, right? It makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, I know that they wouldn't, I would never use that hashtag. But some of them can also be easy to use, a banned one, even if you don't realize it. And for example, hashtag kickoff was on a recent list. So it's just one easy thing to do to just check and make sure that you're not using any banned hashtags, because your content won't see any reach if you do use one. Now we get to some other things that require a little bit more work, but are still good tips. First is to evaluate whether or not you need to post at a different day or a different time. This sounds really obvious, but it can be hard to do. And sometimes I put a note in my calendar, like once a month, to go ahead and have a dedicated time to evaluate from your insights in each platform. There's an insights section, and you can just see if there's any conclusions you can draw about your posting. So if you've been seeing no engagement in the mornings, try some evenings, or maybe Fridays are, a down day for you and not going well. Maybe move some posts to Mondays, things like that. Next up is to look at what your competitors are doing. So first off, always good to follow other organizations who are either similar to you or maybe doing similar work, maybe a similar size, even if it's a different mission. Or just people who are doing work you admire. And you want to see what types of posts are they doing to get engagement. And if they're doing something, go ahead and borrow that idea. Don't replicate it word for word, of course. But if they're asking key questions on Wednesday afternoons, maybe that's something that you could also do. You also want to mix up the content with other types of things. So static posts maybe are easy to do, but maybe think about doing quizzes or surveys. Videos always are great. Polls, questions, adding, all sorts of different things can really help vary your engagement. And you also want to consider collaboration. So some of those same organizations that I mentioned, looking and seeing what they're doing, consider reaching out to them and saying, hey, would you want to do a cross post together and see if engagement increases. Next is to look to your staff. You have an engaged community of brand advocates right at your fingertips with your staff. And if you have those people interact with your post and share your own content on social media, that can improve organic reach across the board. I also think it's really important to just start really close to home and look to your own team for help. And this is something you can actually control. So ask your staff to spend a few days a week liking and commenting and sharing some of your posts, and see how much that can actually help. Lastly, here we want to make sure that sometimes, and just occasionally, but it can be a good idea to actually ask your followers for engagement. And in different platforms, the language changes, but you can ask them to add your org as a favorites to their favorites list. And that will make them, the algorithm will then make it more easy for them to see all of your organic social posts. You can also make sure that you're reminding people to follow you on other channels. So maybe you're getting a lot of engagement on Twitter, but not as much on Instagram. Make it part of your practice where on Twitter, you're always asking people to go and follow you and engage with your posts on Instagram as well. Finally, the last thing that we'll say here is that if you want engagement, you have to give engagement. And so one of my best pieces of advice is that if you're still seeing no engagement on any of your posts, have your staff go and comment as your org on your platforms at least 10 times per day, if you can, not every day, but on the posts of your competitors, on your followers, on other influencers, or other orgs in your community. And this will actually be really surprising that if you start going and commenting on other people's posts, if you start sharing yours, then that kind of engagement that you have with other organizations or other people online will actually start to boost some of your own engagement. And that's just because, you know, social media is social. So we have to start there. All right, I hope those tips were really helpful. We have some reflection here, and I will kick it back to Adriana to finish us off here.
Thanks, Megan. We do have time for folks who have questions for Geely or Dr. Barber, but we do have some kind of last minute reflection questions for you all. We'd love to know what tools and tactics you're planning on using leaving this training. What are you most excited to try? Which tips were most helpful? Which were your aha moments? So please feel free to still give us a few little tidbits in the chat. And we'll move over to questions from folks around the general training. And before we do that, I just want to take a moment to again invite you to stay in touch with us. This won't be the last time you hear from us, even though this training series is over. If you don't already follow us on social media, please do so. We'll drop some links in the chat, but we are on Facebook, X, I guess it's not formerly known as Twitter. I'm still grieving that. That name change. Instagram, YouTube. If you've missed any of our trainings, we're also adding those to YouTube so you can catch up. And I also want to take a moment to invite you to sign up for our latest biweekly newsletter, Community Voices. For us at Public Good News, it's so important that we continue to collaborate with community-based organizations and partners on the ground who are doing the work. So this newsletter really is an homage to showcasing that work. We would love to get your pitches on stories that you think we should be covering. Currently, we're looking for community-based organizations that really have some lessons learned as we're going into the fall vaccination season. If you'd like to talk to me, just feel free to send me an email or stick around after the training. I'll have a few moments to get your information. We're also looking for anyone who's had really great success stories, reaching out to young adults with COVID vaccinations or older folks as well, or any particular angle that you don't think is being covered when it comes to COVID vaccines in general. I'd love to hear from you. But our Community Voices newsletter, the latest one came out today, so hopefully you're not missing out. Ashley's going to drop the link to sign up in the chat. But yeah, I will pause here in case anyone else has any last questions for the training team. And we're going to go ahead and kick off the last survey as well. So I'll pause there just to give us some time to get everybody in order there. Awesome. And that's all we have for everyone today. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your attention and your engagement in the chat. We really appreciate this group and look forward to staying in touch. So I have a question here from, let's see. Will there be a recording? Yes, Amanda, we're actually going to put that on YouTube, and I'll make sure to email everyone who is on the training, like where to find that once it's up. So happy to share that with you. Thank you. It's a great question. If you're still here, please fill out our Zoom poll questions so that we can improve future trainings. But again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your attention and support. Oh, I appreciate that comment, Lori. Lori says that they're less scared of social media now. Love to hear that.
That might be my favorite comment yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to close the chat unless anyone else has something else they'd like to say. If not, you're welcome to come off mute if you do. Otherwise, I'll ask our partner Sophia to go ahead and close the room. All right. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Bye.